can start. We do not know whether there will come some other participants because the plenary did use more time than they were allowed to. Yes, but I want to say welcome. It's very good to see you here in this workshop. You found in the entrance that this workshop is hosted by ATTAC, the ultramondialist network in Germany. We prepared this workshop because we found it very interesting and a good opportunity to get in touch and to have discussions with you here during this forum. Yes, we have now less than 1.5 hours. That's really not a lot because we try to tackle a very, very big question, narrowing the gap between the world's richest and poorest. It seems to be impossible to do this in 90 minutes, and it is even more difficult to do it in 80. But perhaps first I may introduce the panelists here and say a few words about our plan for this session, and then we can really start. I am Jutta Sundermann. I'm one of the founders of ATTAC in Germany, and yes, I'm an activist. I love to prepare campaigns, and I'm a lot of my time organizing political education. I'm also a media worker, mostly not only freelance but unpaid. And one of my projects was, together with Fabian and others, to create a fake copy of the German weekly newspaper Die Zeit. In 2009, it was a newspaper from the future where we listed a lot of good ideas and opportunities to create another world. Okay, to my right, there's Fabian Scheidler. He's, also a colleague and a friend from the ATTAC network, but not only that. Fabian is a dramatic advisor, a freelance author, and an artist, and also one of, I just learned it here, this citizen journalist, a new one, because you founded a television project based on the internet, Context TV. You find information on the chairs, and for this you try to get in touch. You have great interviews with activists of movements from all around the world, and you travel around the world to meet them in India directly or during the World Social Forum in Dhaka. And then you make more news happen and give people a chance to build their opinion with this other voices and this other kind of news. On my other side, there's Peter Hermann. We had much fun to find out where he's living or working. It seems to be everywhere. He's a senior research fellow for social policy at the University College Cork, but not only in Ireland. He's also to be found in Budapest, in Moscow. He is also in Munich as a correspondent to the MPI for the Foreign and International Social Law, and an associate professor for social economics at the University of Eastern Finland. All around the world, it seems to me. And you're dealing with welfare policies as well as the process of European integration, social policy and the third sector, and more about human rights and economics. And the third party, or the next point in this session, is you. I really like to have intensive workshops. If we are not too many people here, we have a chance for good debates. And it is very interesting for me to know at least a very few things about all these people here in this room, because I'm sure there is a lot of experience and a lot of very important opinions. We are too many to have a very concentrated round, but perhaps it is one chance to, if I can ask a few questions, and if this question is right for you, you can lift your hand or even stand up. I don't know, you seem to be a little bit tired in the moment. It's very often a problem during such a conference. Everybody's sitting on the chair for many, many hours, and standing up sometimes also means changing the perspective a little bit. Because I'm really interested. I just wondered during the last plenary session, who of you is a journalist or who of you is a media worker? Okay, thank you. And of those, of you media activists, of you journalists, are you dealing with the question of narrowing a gap between rich and poor professionally and regularly, or is it a more extra situation? Who deals regularly, more often, with this question of poverty and richness of the gap? Okay. Only one, thank you, but perhaps it is very important for you and for us all to have you here and your experiences. Is there anybody in this room who is, as a professional, dealing with social questions, development issues, perhaps in institutions, governments, ministry, or something like that? Okay, again. And are there activists or people engaged in unions, churches, non-governmental organizations? Okay. I'm very much interested in what you are going to say later, all of you. Now, let's start. We have, at the concept for this session, 2 rounds. The first round will deal with some kind of analysis, some kind of naming the main challenges or perhaps also the problems, because it is clear there exist enormous gaps between rich and poor, and in many situations and on very different variations. And I asked the 2 colleagues to speak a very short 10 minutes about the main challenges and their main analysis and some kind of demand for most important changes. And perhaps then you already are interested to debate and to discuss, to question perhaps some of these ideas here. But I really want to have time for a second round afterwards, a second round in which we have a closer look at the special role of the media and the chance perhaps that may be there if media tries, or if media follows some of these ideas discussed here, and perhaps also where the most important difficulties for this are there. Okay, then let's come to the first round. There are millions, more than 1 billion in some situations, people on our planet having not enough food. There is much reasons and much facts that make us thinking about this gap that seems to be so impossible to narrow. We had these Millennium Development Goals, and we learn every day that there is only very, very small successes and really a lot of reasons to be in despair. We have people hungry in the so-called developing countries, but we also have people with troubles with food in the developed, industrialized countries. And we have many other gaps, but I think, Fabian, you are going to speak about those different kinds of gaps and also about the usual strategy how to close this gap during the last years or even centuries, and and your opinion to that. Perhaps you start. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jutta, and good morning to everyone. I would like to start with describing the gap. 2008 was a remarkable year, not only because of the financial crisis, but also because it was the first year when the number of millionaires in the world passed 10 million. So we have more than 10 million millionaires now on the world. In the same year, the number of people starving on this planet passed 1 billion. Jutta mentioned this number already. 1 billion people are starving, and this means also that 17,000 children are dying of hunger or hunger-related diseases every day today. And this in spite of the fact that we produce globally enough food to feed global population twice. So it's not a matter of production, it's a matter of distribution. According to the World Wealth Report, the mentioned 10 million millionaires, which make up about 0.2% of the world's population, own $40 trillion. That is $40,000 billion. And this is very abstract, but it represents 1/3 of the world's assets. So 0.2% of the population possess 1/3 of the world's assets. This fortune is twice as big as what the lower 90% of the world's population own together. And this is still growing. The gap is growing. It is expected that in 2012, the fortune of the 0.2% is going to reach $60 trillion. So an increase of 5% of 50% within several years. If we zoom in on an even smaller number of people, we see that 3 people in the world, the 3 richest people in the world, own as much as the populations of the 48 poorest countries in the world together. So it's a huge gap. It's unprecedented in world history. The concentration of wealth and the growing gap is accelerating all over the world, almost all over the world, in India as well as in the US, in China as well as in Germany. The gap is often measured by the so-called Gini coefficient, representing the degree of inequality in a society, 0 meaning total equality and 1 meaning one person gets all revenues, which in fact is of course never the case. In China, this index has doubled during the last 30 years. It has reached 0.47 now. And in the US, it's also about the same level, 0.46. It is interesting that the World Bank argues that beyond 0.4 of the Gini coefficient, it's likely that riots and social upheavals will occur. So China and the US and many other states in the world are already beyond this threshold. In the US, 15,000 families constituting 0.01% of the population own about 6% of US assets. And when Ronald Reagan came into office in the early 80s, those people, those 15,000 families, possessed only 1% of the global assets, of the US assets. So within 30 years since Reagan, the possessions of the highest strata of society has increased by the factor 6. We see similar developments in the developing world. In India, for example, which is praised for its extreme growth rate. India is the country with the fastest growing number of billionaires in the world. There are around 80, some say also 100. At the same time, still 70% of Indian population live on less than $2 in purchasing power units per day, which is defined as the line of poverty by the World Bank. And in India also, within the last 10 years, about 250,000 farmers, peasants, committed suicide because of over-indebtment. So you see a huge gap also in India, in spite of some say also because of these extreme growth rates. When we look to Germany, Germany has of course a lower Gini coefficient, so it's a little bit more equitable in Germany than in the US or in India. But the Gini coefficient is rising also in Germany, and the OECD stated in a 2006 report that since the year 2000, income inequality and poverty in Germany have risen more sharply than in any other OECD country. So these are just a few numbers to give you an idea about the gap. When you look at the years that I mentioned, you see some some years of transition, let's say. In the early 80s in the US, it was, of course, the beginning of Reaganomics. That means of neoliberal policies in the US. When you look at India, it started in 1992 that a neoliberal agenda after the debt crisis in India started, mainly by trade liberalization. And in 2000, of course, in Germany, the Schröder reforms in terms of labor market reforms, social security reforms started. It took some years, and what is all these countries and all these agendas have in common is something which is usually referred to as the trickle-down theory. I think some of you will have heard of this. It's also sometimes called the horse shit theorem, which means you feed the big horse and everybody else will get something. The idea is that if you make the rich richer, they will invest, they will create jobs, and eventually their wealth will trickle down to the poor. This theory, however, has proved to fail dramatically during the past 30 years. In fact, the financial crisis in 2008 showed very clearly that this unprecedented accumulation of wealth that I was talking about is not creating benefit for the poor, basically, but is creating financial bubbles. And so the theory has failed, but however, it's not over. The theory is still in place. Now, I would like to... I would like to talk very generally about two ways of looking at this problem when we talk about describing the gap and closing the gap. One type of looking at is, I call it thesis A, is that, well, it's natural. It's the way the world works. Smart people are making good money because of their superior skills, their ingenuity and education, and of course because of good governments, whatever this is in their country. And poverty, by contrast, is a result of a lack of skills and intelligence, of bad governments, corruption, and so on. In other words, if we talk about root causes of poverty, we have to focus on what the poor do or do not, on what the poor can or cannot. It's like sometimes of psychology. I mean, you look at a person showing symptoms and you search for the causes of these symptoms within that person, and you don't look at the broader context. Well, I don't say that all this is rubbish altogether. I mean, of course, corruption is a cause for poverty. Of course, lack of skills causes poverty all over the place. But I would like to present you with a different thesis which tries to look in a more systemic way on things. And in this perspective, we assume that wealth and poverty are interlinked. They are not two different things, but they are interlinked, and one depending on the other, one creating the other. So the poor are also poor because the rich are rich. So my thesis here is that the excessive accumulation of wealth is a main and maybe the main cause for poverty in the world today. When we look at resources, when we look at the streams of resources, of money and of knowledge in the world, we observe a constant drain from the poor to the rich during the past 30 years, internationally as well as within countries. Resources. 20%, and I think some of you will know this number, 20% of the world's population are consuming 80% of the world's resources. Well, we live within a limited Earth system, and we are already consuming the equivalent of 1.5 planets today. That means if 20% are already consuming 80% of the resources, there's nothing left for the poor. And this also means that the overconsumption of those 20% is directly undermining the livelihoods and sometimes even the mere survival of those 80% or of the low strata of global society. One recent and very clear example of this is land grabbing. Countries like Saudi Arabia and China also, and many transnational corporations, are buying up huge chunks of land in Africa and Latin America to feed their people and also to produce agrofuels to feed their cars, which are, of course, the cars of the 20% of the world's population who can afford to drive cars. Now, this has, as a result, a sharp increase of food prices as a consequence, and this is aggravating the state of starvation of the poorest. So that is a very clear example of how our resource consumption is creating poverty. We could... Okay, I have to go very briefly through the rest. There are many other examples, and I will talk about climate change also later. But when we look at money, another stream in the world, we see that, for example, in Germany, child poverty is rising, which is interesting because the GDP, in real terms, that is inflation already subtracted, the GDP in Germany has doubled during the last 30 years. At the same time, we are hearing all the time we cannot afford our social security anymore, and poverty is rising. So it's not about the amount of money that is there, but it's about distribution. When we look at developing countries, we want to detect the stream of money going around the world, we have to talk about the debt crisis also, which developing countries are facing since the 70s and the 80s, which were followed by structural adjustment programs by the IMF, devastating many economies in African, Latin American, and Asian countries. And in fact, the IMF tried to push these countries to repay their debts, and in fact, they repaid their debt. They repaid their debt 102 times what they owed to the banks in the global north in the 70s. But still, their debt has increased by 48 times. So there is a constant flow of money from developing countries to the banks in the north due to the debt. And I think I have to close very quickly. I just want to mention one more thing, that is brain drain. Many developing countries are suffering from brain drain. I give just one example. Ethiopia is training a lot of excellent doctors, but there are more Ethiopian doctors in Chicago today than there are in Ethiopia. Ethiopia lost 75% of its skilled workforce in the 80s and 90s. So I have to stop here. I think I'm still not with the solutions and just with the description, but I hope we'll have time in the second round to go deeper into what can be done to narrow this gap.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabian. First, I want to welcome all the others who arrived during the last speech here. You are in our workshop, Narrowing the Gap Between the World's Richest and Poorest, and this workshop is organized by ATTAC, the German network of ultramondialists. You just heard a few impressions about how this gap could be described, and also a first very important question whether it's the right approach to fight the poverty while only changing the poor and demanding that there has to be some things done, but also to ask what is happening on the other side about excessive accumulation, about richness that makes such a lot, that causes most of these troubles. Now, Peter Hermann, you listen to Fabian. I'm very interested whether you can agree. Ich muss ausmachen, sonst habe ich
Yeah.
I'm very interested whether you can agree to his thesis or his questions. And you already said that you might help us to have a more clearer definition of this gap we are speaking about, or these gaps.
Well, as you said in the beginning, we can't really cover the topic completely. And what I say, please don't understand it as a complete contradiction or opposition to what Fabian said. But to start with, I think we are not talking about distribution, we are talking about production. And production is actually not just a matter of manufacturing products, but it's a wider field. And I think we have to look at this, and distribution is part of it. You mentioned the horse shit theory, the translation of the trickle-down effect. What you see there is you feed the horse, as you said, and the rest has to be picked up. This is a very important point. It is not just feeding the horse more than the sparrows, but it is about the sparrow has to pick up what is left. This is a very important point, I think. And you used, or you corrected yourself once, saying the farmers and then the peasants. The farmers and peasants are different. It's not the same. And I think this shows a huge problem we have in the entire debate, and we usually fade it out. We are talking about different systems of production, and this is, I think, a hugely important and largely neglected aspect of the entire debate. Human rights as global rights, I think, are important, and we should not contest this, even if you may get the impression I would suggest this. Global human rights are essential, and there is no doubt, and there cannot be any doubt of that life, depending on less than $1 per day or whatever the figures are, is something we cannot respect, and we have to fight against this. And on this level, in which way ever, I'm very much in favor of a radical solution in terms of distribution. Get the rich, not poor, but distribute the resources that are there. At the same time, there was another joke actually when we started, or when we prepared this session, not only in terms of locating me where I'm based, but as well about a triangle. Global rights, as I said, universal rights, and at the same time we have to look at local rights, because in which way ever we have rights only localized, meaning realized in local life. We can say there are abstract norms, legal norms, as the United Nations Declaration, and they, as I said, no doubt it is important. But the meaning of it is only coming to the fore, is only getting clear when we are looking at it on the local level. And usually our claim is, third point, as I said, we had been talking about triangles. Third point is we have moral standards. We all know what is good and what is a life in dignity and. Do we? Can we say we know what it is and apply these general norms on the local level? I promise you, as soon as you try it, you run into conflicts. Universal, global, local, moral. I say what we have to look at is the production side. It's not about looking for standards of moral standards of distributing justice, equality, equity, all these norms. We have to look at what does it mean in economic terms, and how can we define something that is valid. And there I am economist as well. We have to look at the economic dimension of the social. We have to look at the economic dimension of the law. Laws, legal determinations are important as such, but we have to look at the economic dimension behind it. How do we not feed the horse and get something more to the sparrows, but how do we respect as a right the different ways of production? And how do we look at not producing more of what we have? Indirectly, you mentioned at the end, towards the end, and looking at environmental issues. All this means that we easily tend to say, okay, we have to produce more, or we have to distribute what we have. I think we have to look as well at how do we produce and what do we actually produce. We produce currently very much with the Western model, with the capitalist model, something that is not sustainable, that undermines the future not only of those countries that are frequently called the third world countries or developing world, but we undermine our own basis as well in terms of the so-called developed capitalist countries. There was yesterday a remark during one of the sessions I attended, blaming the Greek people, namely the Greek government, for having a social policy that is too good, that is not sustainable, and that cannot be paid for. I think this is a somewhat nearly outrageous remark. This is what production should be about. It should be about producing something from the beginning, not sustainable in terms of the capitalist financial markets or something like this, but that should be sustainable in terms of something that is there for the people. This can mean very different things. So I don't say I have the final solution to it, but I think we have to think about this in terms of where do we want to go? Do we just want to distribute what we have, or do we want to have a different model of production? As I said, it can mean very different things, but I think it is the fourth factor, and this fourth factor is not just something added on. Global rights, yes. Local concretization, yes. Moral norms, moral standards, yes. But look for how can we economically define how these three come together. Actually, I won't use the 10 minutes. I'll stop here for a while and we can go on further. Thank you.
Okay, but for me it was just a very interesting question. You very often said other way of production, other way of sustainability, but I still have difficulties to have a clear picture what it does mean. Also in the case we speak of limits of growth, and you mean something else, but I'm not sure whether it was clear enough.
Well, I can briefly add to this that, again, only one point or a couple of points. Much of the work we produce is not acknowledged as economic performance. Look at the role, changing, of course, and taking different forms. Look at the role of women, the production of women in the household. It's not part of any GDP calculation or anything like this. Okay, as I said, there are changes and there are alterations and beyond GDP calculations now and this and that. But principally, it remains the same. You said you are working not only freelance, but you are actually working on a voluntary basis. What is this? Show me any GDP calculation where this can be seen. And there are many, many things. It includes and there we are coming to a point of production distribution with another dimension. There are some people working 60 hours or more, killing themselves, and sorry, I'm cynical teaching this stuff, fortunately leaving fast enough and not our pension systems don't have to bother with them anymore. And others are unemployed. This is a question of production and a different production, acknowledging what people do. And these people, we all know figures there as well, being unemployed, long-term unemployment means a health issue as well. people are suffering, people are getting sick, others are getting sick by overwork. So this is something where I think we have to change the mode of production, and this means as well what we actually acknowledge as being part of production.
Thank you very much. Fabian, can you agree with Peter's definitions? And perhaps you managed also to add a few of your alternatives. You had not enough time before, because the question, what can we do now, is very much on the line.
Yes, I completely agree with Peter, unfortunately, because there's little controversy. We have to change our mode of production, that is clear. I think we are facing a watershed. We see a number of crises. We see climate crisis, we see financial crisis, and we see food crisis all over the place. So we really see a mode of production and consumption and distribution, all of this, challenged today. And I think it's not a watershed only of what has happened in the last 30 years, reversing neoliberal policies and going back to Keynesianism of the 60s. It is a watershed, I think, really questioning the mode of production, the mode of capital accumulation being in place for the last 500 years. And it's a huge challenge. It's a challenge for all humankind. And I think everything will be challenged, the way we produce, the role models, women and men. And so there are so many levels on which to work here. And this is also what I would like to say, narrowing the gap. There is no single button to press on or something that we could decide on conference tables, just let's do that and thing will work. This is about conflicts and also it is about conflicts because narrowing the gap, as I said, if narrowing the gap really means not only to empower the poor, but also to stop wealth accumulation, if it is true that wealth accumulation and the mode of production which leads to this wealth accumulation is one or the most important root causes for poverty, then we have to stop wealth accumulation or we have to reverse it. And this is, of course, about conflict. It's not a win-win situation because, of course, wealthy people usually disliked to gain less. And Wolfgang Sachs, who's with the Wuppertal Institute, once stated, it's not in the first place about giving more to the poor, about charity, or also about development aid, which might be important, but the central point is to take less. And that means to stop these resource streams from the poor. For example, I give just one example, bauxite mining. There used to be a lot of aluminium production in Europe 30 or 40 years ago. Now there's no aluminium production in Europe. It has all been exported to the global south. So the huge environmental impacts and the displacement, for example, in India, hundreds of thousands and millions of people are displaced because of mining in India today, directly creating poverty, and these people end up in slums usually, to extract the bauxite, to produce aluminium, and we are producing Airbuses, cars, bicycles, whatever. And to stop this drain means just to consume, to produce less aluminium, of course. So, and this is about conflict. It's about car industries. It's about huge lobby groups which have a lot of political influence. And we also have to look at the institutions which organize this flow of resources, because it's not true that we live in a completely free market or whatever and it's completely deregulated. No, it has been re-regulated since the 70s. But there are powerful, very powerful institutions like the International Monetary Fund, the WTO, the Club of Paris, which is the club to look after the debt services. And for example, if we take just one institution, the International Monetary Fund, which has a quite devastating record, and the IMF itself recognized that their programs were devastating in Africa, for example, in the 80s and 90s. Now the same IMF, together with the EU, imposes the same type of structural adjustment on Greece. We just see how in a country like Greece, mass poverty is manufactured. The programs that the EU and the IMF imposed 1 year ago led to massive poverty. For example, 1,000 schools have been recently announced to be closed within this year by the Greek government. Hospitals are running out of the most basic stuff, so they have to close. And at the same time, the debt of Greece has risen since for the last 1 year. It used to be 140% of the GDP. Now it is 150% of the GDP. So the whole recipe doesn't work. And we could
what has to be done? That's a question, because we had quite a lot of description already. What has to be done to change this?
Yeah, what has to be done in the first place is we cannot narrow the gap without stopping the widening of the gap. And what the IMF in this moment, here, while we are sitting in this room, is doing with Greece is widening the gap, is destroying the most basic social networks in the country. So we have to stop this first. And of course, at the same time, we have to develop concepts on all types of production, of trade policies, of tax policies. There's so many issues. But if we don't stop the neoliberal agenda, which is widening the gap now, we won't achieve anything at all. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Peter is very relaxed. Then now I think perhaps one of you might have a question or some idea about the things already said here in the front, so that we have some minutes to discuss that, or to collect a few questions, and then to ask for the special role or challenges for media. Okay, I have had difficulties to see who was first, but we may start there. The lady in the white. Behind you, both of you wanted to say, behind you is a young woman who has first.
Hi, my name is Karina, and I'm currently finishing my master program in European Studies. Thanks a lot for the presentation. And my first comment I want to make is that I know that, or it's also for me a thing, what I'm thinking about what are actually the solutions to that problem, but I think if there would have already been real solutions, then we would already have started to implement it, and I think it's not working because economically speaking, I think there are solutions, and economically speaking, you can do analysis and graphs showing you that, for example, from trade or any production, you could easily get rid of this big gap. But I think the problem here is only on the political side, because and I hope I don't accuse anyone in this room here, but if we have panelists, for example, that enjoy diplomatic status, I think those people, for example, are overpaid. And I think that political level is the one which has enormous responsibility to also fight for that. And I don't think that there is enough political will to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we collect first, and you can give the microphone the line before. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I would like to propose that in order to get to the bottom of the problem concerning Greece and other countries like it, we should make a comparison. What makes Germany, for example, successful? We know that Germany is a powerhouse of production in many, many respects. And of course, we also know that German people and their government are very highly disciplined. So what's the difference? What makes Germany successful? What makes countries like Greece and Ireland less successful? What caused the problems there? Compare that with how the Germans managed their system. And maybe through that, we can get some answers for not just Ireland and Germany and other countries in Africa, but elsewhere.
Okay, thank you very much. Perhaps a third question on this half, and then Fabian already wanted to answer, perhaps also Peter.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, the idea of, trying to narrow the gap between the richest and poorest countries. And I think we should be looking at solutions that are human rights based, if we are looking at solutions, not just solutions, And also, I was just thinking that maybe we need to put it in the context of what is the role of the media in this, in trying to help narrow the gap. Because if you look at the theme of the conference, is human rights in a globalized world, challenges for the media. And if we are talking about solutions, to narrow the gap, what actually is the media doing? Is the media helping the process of narrowing the gap? Or is the media, inhibiting the process of narrowing the gap? I think we should be looking at that. And I think I didn't hear that from either of the two speakers. Also, it's also good to put it to give a kind of a historical context of the challenges now that we face, the gap that is widening between the richest countries and the poorest countries. For instance, after the Cold War, the Cold War period, the idea of positive rights, and the idea of negative rights, came up. And it's still there, even after the Vienna Conference in 1993, where it was resolved that, all rights should be considered equal. But yet, we still have a situation where the political and civil rights are considered to be more important than economic, social, and cultural rights. And I think we should also look at it from that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was already a little bit step to the next round we planned. But perhaps Fabian can start, and Peter also wants to add something.
Yes. First, thank you very much for the question concerning Greece and what makes Germany successful and Greece unsuccessful. That is very interesting because, and it also refers to the question of the media. Usually the Greek problem is referred to as a problem of the Greek, which is the psychological way of looking at the symptom and not at the context. The matter of the fact is that the main structural cause for the Greek crisis, there are other factors, but the main cause is that we have a Eurozone, we have one currency, but Germany is outcompeting other European countries by loan dumping, by wage dumping. So Germany has, during the last 10 years, lowered or kept their loans, the wages down, and there were some increases in Greece and Portugal and other countries, about 2.5%, but the common goal was to have 2% increase every year in every country. So if Germany is doing wage dumping, of course the exports. Germany is the export champion, but what does it mean? It means that other countries must have a deficit. And this is a structural problem within the European community which leads to these crises, because the Greek have a structural deficit which leads to a budget deficit also in comparison to Germany. But what they are doing now, instead of saying, well, Germany has to stop the wage dumping, they say, well, the Greek have to do the same thing. They have to lower the wages and get down the drain as the others do. So there, in my opinion, there is, and this refers to the media question, there is a lack of reporting on structural issues. And this has a lot to do with how journalism today works and corporate journalism works. For example, we hear a lot about Dominic Strauss-Kahn and his alleged crime, which is important to know about, but we hear very little about the structural crimes committed by the IMF for the last 30 years. So I think this has to be addressed. How can journalists report on macroeconomic things that we all should know in order to participate in an informed way in democratical processes? And these things are not too difficult to understand for people who are not economists. They are quite understandable, but they are very little reported. So, yeah. Thank you.
Coming to the first, or beginning at the beginning actually, coming to the first contribution, there are, I would disagree there are no solutions I think there are solutions, but in this respect, I would contradict what you said. At the same time, I would strongly emphasize and agree with what you said. There is no or not sufficient political will. And if you look at the situation there, coming as well to the solutions and to something what Fabian said, we have international institutions, IMF and you name it, but we do not have a political, international or global government. Economics is global. Politics is national. I worked for a long time in the European Union institutions. It is amazing and frightening when it comes to the point of giving national power away to political power away to even regional instances like the European Union. It is amazing and frightening what you see there. So yes, political power, or the other way around, there is a lack of political will of sustaining or developing such solutions. I think this is something where we have to start when it comes to thinking about solutions. And it is about making clear as well, and there is a role, strong role definitely as well for the media, that we have to think about, or that we have to focus on, I just select two things. Quality. I'm working at a university, and having different positions doesn't mean that I have different incomes. If you look at the way universities work today, it's simply ridiculous and frightening. I'm just fighting with what I still call my home university in Cork. They want to introduce a master 1 year. It brings us actually back to the question of what are we producing, and universities are producing as well. They are producing in this way a bad education. In 1 year, sorry, I cannot get a master in 1 year if it's not an intensive course. That's a different thing. If I make a really intensive course, it's a different thing. I can do it. But not under these conditions. So we have to look at quality as well. Health sector, and I mention these sectors not least because they are usually seen more as the unproductive parts. This is something we have to consider and we have to keep in mind when it comes to something. I worked with Paul Boccarat on this, what he called formation ou emploi, which means recognize employment, but as well recognize formation, education. Education is something valuable, and we have to think about how to recognize it, not simply by getting a job afterwards, but by including it as being recognized positively. And we have currently the debate since a couple of years in the European Union on lifelong learning. There are small steps, perhaps we can link up with them. There was another thing I want to make briefly as well in terms of the success. I don't know actually, and it's not only a matter of not having understood. Where did you put Ireland? Was it the success or the lack of success countries? Ireland had been the most successful, celebrated countries for many years. And now they are the worst of countries since at least 2009. This was the official launch of the crisis in Ireland. And there you come to the point of success and not success, and how do you get there? People in Ireland said for about 5 years before the crisis, forget it. it won't work. It won't be sustainable development. Huge success, yes, but it won't be sustainable. Economists, colleagues said this, they wrote about it. My neighbor, she will be now 80 years of age, never ever left Ireland, kind of difficulties to get to Dublin. She didn't like to go to Dublin. Why should I go there? It's so nice here around. She said, we are stupid. We can't do this. We built on an economy where we have all this wealth and where we have all this productivity gains, but what will be there in a couple of years? She is a simple farmer's woman, as I said, very local, and she knew that this government goes the wrong way. And of course, we all went with it, not least because this was the point, or one of the important points. We are drawn into this process and we do not have a choice. So I think, yes, coming again back to the first point, we need political will. We have solution. That's another thing where I would say, where I would not agree. We have solutions, but we need the political will, and we need to politically fight for getting these solutions on the way. In this way, I see media, mass media, very much as a political organization or as political players who have to take on board this responsibility.
Okay, I think they're a very important question and also very important kind of consensus here on the panel, that we really have to tackle those difficult questions, those questions that are not the beloved win-win situation, but really about reduction of certain practices. Fabian wanted to add a few words on Ireland.
Yeah, just a few words on Ireland. What we see in Ireland is also manufacturing poverty, because the banks who created the crisis are bailed out completely for the loans that the EU gave. On the pressure of the German government, the Irish government agreed to serve the banks 100%. So the creators of the crisis are served, and the creditors are served 100%. Which are also German banks involved, and the population has to pay. And this, again, referring to media, is very little reported. There was also a study by the Otto Brenner Stiftung 2 years ago about German mainstream media, in the role of German mainstream media in the financial crisis, and it concluded that they had failed. They had failed to accurately represent the causes of the financial crisis.
Okay, I'm just looking at the watch and feeling the stress coming up. There were more questions, and but I still perhaps we make 1 second round of 3, and then I really want to suggest another kind of discussion, because here are so many people, and now we can only take three more. Here the sir there, and in the first line, and perhaps back there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I have observed that there are so many young people. It means that attack has a potential. And I also know that attack is spread in many countries. You've been talking about production. That's the form of or mode of production has to be changed, and the mode of distribution, or the distribution, has to be changed. I think you have a big responsibility of explaining these modes of production and these modes of distribution, because I can read from your name that one of the modes of distribution would be taxation, the Tobin taxation, which was difficult during La Fontaine. He tried it. And you know what the media were doing. So what's the form of production you are suggesting which has to replace the form of production we have now and the form of distribution we have now? Because it's not going to be appropriation, it's not going to be nationalization, it's not in short, going to be socialism. So what are you suggesting instead? Thank you.
Okay, we collect more questions here in the first line. Thank you.
Hello. I'd like to say that I come from Brazil, a country where 5 million people have left poverty in the last few years, and that's something, but that's not everything, because, for instance, inequality rates remain very high, one of the highest of the world, and so on. And I wanted to do 2 short questions for you. Also because I think you may disagree on it. The first one is exactly that. Which are the potentials and the limitations of social policy reform in those countries? Because the safety nets that people are trying to shut down in Greece right now, most part of the world doesn't even have it. So how far do you see these solutions coming? And I also am having some trouble to visualize some practice way out. I understand when you talk about the need of a deeper transformation on production models, but I'd like to see how do you see that coming, if governments can enforce something, or if new business models would do it, and how. A list of good practice, please.
Thank you very much. Very good question, and perhaps the last one, because he's waiting for long now.
Thank you very much. I think this is very interesting discussions. I am Haryadi from Indonesia, participant of Managing Global Governance course hosted by GIZ. With regard to the phenomena, the richer, the poorer, and the way to narrow the gaps. One assumption is that why it happens is about the socio-cultural factor, while the others said it is structural problems. As I see that the speakers haven't touched upon the structural issues, particularly regarding with the reform agenda of the global economic institution like IMF, World Bank, and WTO. So what do you think about this one? Because you see that in 2000s, I think Joseph Stiglitz has already accentuated this phenomena, that the way or the paradigms of the global economic institutions must be fundamentally changed. What do you think about this one? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's try to give some answers now, okay? And perhaps you can find a way who's answering this, which aspect.
Yeah, maybe Peter, you start with the one you would like to answer, and I take the rest.
Well, I'll just try to run through it briefly, and you can add something. I think they are very close together, these 3 question blocks for questions. The social security net, to start with this, I think it is hugely important. And as I said in the beginning of my first input, I don't want to play one against the other. We have to look for simple ways and rather strict ways of distribution and getting the money there where it's needed. So no doubt about this, and there is money, and it's not only in the hands of Bono, who is tax evading, it's in the hands of other people as well, and these people are producing. But I'm just back from Turkey. I worked there for a couple of months and went through this development. They introduce growth economy, they introduce success in inverted commas, and at the same time they kept down the health system. So now what you have is, in general, a success, a growth of wealth, and at the same time you have a growth of inequality. You mentioned it for Brazil as well, and this is what we saw in Ireland, this is what we saw in many, many countries, and I think we saw it all over the world. I had been last year in Australia working with P&G, the same story, growing wealth, yes, at the same time growing inequality. This is something, the different mode of production. What this kind of growth is based upon is a model that is not much different to what Ford created and what became known as Fordist mode of production, as Fordist model. Mass production, you can have the Model T, was it in any color, but it has to be black. Now this changed with post-Fordism. You can have not only for everybody, which was not for everybody, a Ford T, but you can have it in any color. So individualized, adapted production. But still it was leaving out what was really important for society. And these had been, as I said in the beginning, for instance, the work of women doing at the in the house, the service sectors, and I think this is what we have to look at and really change there, not getting more or getting more adaptable stuff out, but to look what are we actually producing and where are we aiming at with what we are producing.
Yes, I was asked to answer very briefly, very complex and great questions. So just on the issue of good practice. In Latin America, it is sometimes very interesting to look at what in Bolivia is happening, for example, to reduce poverty. Bolivia is one of the poorest countries in the world still. But Evo Morales and his administration, for example, renegotiated the contracts with transnational corporations. And in fact, they were able to raise their state revenues by 5%. Because they renegotiated incomes from gas, from other resources. And so there are some practices in place which, in your view, would be maybe too much oriented on states. But I think Bolivia is also an interesting example because it was created by a movement. It was not a traditional party, and it is still supported by movements. And so we see redistribution, and we see also new concepts rising. So, for example, the concept of Mother Earth, which is a very important concept to say also in terms of human rights, because the Bolivian government supports the idea of an international court of crimes against Mother Earth. And this is a very important project, I think, because if you destroy the livelihoods of people by extracting resources and by creating climate change, then it is a huge violation of human rights. But still, there is no mechanism to really bring this into court and to sue those who caused this problem, for example, in climate change, the energy corporations. So there are very important legal ideas coming out of these countries, and I think these should be followed and supported.
Okay.
Yeah, that was short. I could say more things, but
thank you very much. Yeah, it's already 1:45, and that means we have not very long time left. But one idea was to have a closer look on the potential role of the media, especially. We have, of course, there are huge amounts of open questions and not already explained alternatives, but perhaps there were a few very important points here on the panel to say that we have to deal with not with the symptoms, but to have a closer look on the context, on the question where comes all this poverty from and where comes this distribution from, that there are so few have such enormous amounts of money, and on the other side that there is such a lot of poverty and problems, and what could be the role of journalism? Also in the situation we had, Fabian mentioned this study published here in Germany about the journalism in the financial crisis and its difficulties really to tell a story that could be understood on the one hand, but also on the other hand that really asked the most important questions and not only repeated the main opinion of the governments on their hurry to save for the banks. During our attack meetings, we very often make a little break during such a workshop session, and we suggest so-called mumbling rounds. That means you stay on your place, but you look at your neighbors between your left and right, and perhaps in the line behind, and you just have a short exchange, only mumbling, not too noisy, not too loud, but then collect a few ideas or a few questions about this. What can the role of the media be in this challenge to deal with the gap and also to speak about the context and the systemical questions? Perhaps you can try to start. You have only 5 minutes. It's a very short session, but this session is very interesting because everybody can speak at the same time or listen to your neighbor, but then answer him or her directly. Try it. What's the role of the media?
Oh, das war natürlich doof.
Okay, mumbling is everywhere, but time is running out. Such kind of mumbling rounds are a great chance to get in touch and to talk to people you have already seen, but not time enough to discuss. Now, I don't know, we still have the micro here for the room, and perhaps in one or two of your mumbling debates, there was one important thought, one idea. Yeah? You had one? Well, there is the guy with the microphone. You have something? Yeah. Great. Okay, attention, please. Now we proceed.
Hello. Yeah, it works now. And we were swimming into the world of idealism. Actually, we said, of course, this wide gap between the rich and the poor started to become wider and wider after the Second World War, and we talked about the establishment of the United Nations in 1944, and when United Nations articles were drafted in the United States in 1944, they were written in such a way that they served the interest of a few countries, especially the Western countries. And closely looking at the structures of the United Nations, you see that is the cause of the present day widening of the gap between the rich and the poor, if you closely look at them. Look at IMF, look at WTO, and look at all the bodies of the United Nations today. They are supporting this structure. What does it mean? This means that there is a bigger structure, a bigger capitalist world order. Unless this world order changes, it's difficult to change the whole situation. Look at the media, the big media today, CNN, BBC. They are under this structure. They are controlled by big corporations. They propagate the idea of those big corporations, and they don't talk for the poor. So the answer here should be, how do we change this situation? I think we should look for somebody, a new Karl Marx, a new revolutionary. We have to look for a new world order where resources are distributed equitably to everybody in the world. And the media should serve in bringing about and propagating this new world order. That's what we're discussing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are more results here in this room.
Yes, we were discussing a lot on ideological terms and how that level has not been entered the discussion, because you spoke about changing economic models, but you didn't speak about changing political models. And I think the discussion should be political. And we cannot find solutions until we put it at the political level. That's my conclusion. I do not know which political model we should choose, but definitely not the current one. And but we agreed on one point. We have different views on this issue, but we agreed on one point that the media should stop glorifying wealth. The media should stop glorifying accumulation of wealth. And we saw that in The Economist, for example, in the heap of the crisis, the sovereign debt crisis, The Economist had a special edition on how the rich spend their money, glorifying the universities where they spend the money, the hotels, the splendering of wealth. And I think the media, because liberal societies leave the decision of what is a happy life for the market of ideas, this space has been occupied by the market, by consumption. And that's also a discussion that society should have. What is to be happy? What other aspects of life are there that make you a happy person, apart from money, from material goods? I think that's...
And we should stop speaking about the media. There are several media. I work for Deutsche Welle in Africa, Middle East desk, and every single day we are reporting on these issues, on poverty, on difference, etc. So we should not speak about the media, but difference, please.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, very important points. Perhaps there are more fingers in the air. We collect some more, and it is, very good.
Thank you. We had two approaches. The first was that maybe if the media, we both identified that the media does not have the capacity generally to understand these issues properly enough to address them, at least in the greater part of the world that is most affected by the very issues. So one suggestion was that we could reinforce our rural reports exposing these conditions as a first step to at least dealing with the problem. But the other thing is to come to terms with the fact that these issues are a bit more heavy than simple media reportage, and there is a need for increased investment and encouragement of diverse experts in dealing with issues regarding statistics and the gap between the rich and the poor, because this is the reality. Talking about poverty and social exclusion is quite different from understanding or challenging the government with regards to how it is not aware of the gaps between the rich and the poor. So people like you who may have a good knowledge in economics or stuff like that, the institution should be more attractive so that you can have competitive agencies with government statisticians talking about these issues. Yeah.
Thank you. One more, and then I think that was the hands in the air.
Yes, actually, two ideas were floated about the role of the media. The first one actually was a bit more kind of pessimistic view about how can the media play a role in this particular, in resolving this gap when the media is owned by the rich. That this kind of poses kind of a challenge, and we discussed it at length. And another idea actually also was floated that, which was at least positive, kind of optimistic idea, that when you look at the journalists who are part of the media corporate establishments, they are professionals, and they have, what we call social responsibility, to be able to, put context in what they are saying and talk about some of these structural problems that were kind of mentioned, during the discussions. And in that way, promote better understanding and also, serve as watchdogs in society, because it's part of the role of the journalist to serve as watchdogs of society. So if they play that role in that way, despite the fact that they are part of the rich establishments, they can still make a difference in society. So it's pessimistic but also optimistic. So that's how we looked at it.
Just a short question. I also work for the Deutsche Welle, and I would like to ask you if you are completely free to write whatever you want in the Deutsche Welle, because we talk a lot about the role of journalists, but we are part of big structures, and we answer to editorial politics. So I don't know if we are completely free and we can really make a change from these places.
Okay, it was a very important question in the end. I don't know whether it is possible to answer it here or whether we all take it with us. And I'm not from the Deutsche Welle. Okay. Okay, there are also very good experiences, at least here in the room. But I learned a lot of very important points from you after this round. I think it is true that there is not one media and we can deal with it, and it would be always one voice and one problem. There are a lot of differences, and there lies also big chances, of course, because it was also said that media and journalists can really play an active role in changes, and that there is a big need to have fundamental changes, like you said here in the first row, about the glorifying the wealth and the growth and not developing real alternatives. I have 1 minute closing speech from both of the panelists, and then we all can hurry downstairs to the closing session.
Yes, concerning the role of the media or the media in a broader sense, I think we have to face challenges in different kinds. Ownership has been addressed, and this has a lot to do with ideology. Because if media are owned by the rich, well, then they will promote this ideology. And also we should talk about advertisement. When in the panel 2 hours ago, it was talked about what media is, and it's about journalism, it's about fiction, it's about documentary. Advertisement was not mentioned, but it's a huge part of media, and it's a huge part of ideology. So we should talk about this. And this was also one reason we chose a way to found a new institution, Context TV, to cover issues which we thought were underrepresented. And we don't have any advertisement in this. And that was a very clear choice to say, well, if we are paid by advertisement in one way or another, we serve this ideology. And but also for people being in institutions, it's a fight about getting more resources for investigative journalism. Because small projects like we cannot do investigative work. We can take the resources, for example, that are in society and make interviews with people, and that is an enormous wealth that we have. And I was amazed how many very good experts we got, which never appear in the public media and in the private media, which have to say a lot. That is a huge resource, but at the same time, of course, we need well-paid investigative journalists who create news stories, and this has to be fought within all the institutions.
Thank you very much, Peter.
No answer, just some thoughts, 2 thoughts. The one is, can we say what we want in the media? I'm not working in the media, I'm working in the university. We cannot say, although we can say. There is a kind of mental block. There is a kind of mainstream, and this is what we follow, and there are certain things we fade out. We always individually fight against it, but I think this is something we have to say, we have to do. Watchdog, yes, but it is only a real watchdog if it can bite, and this means if it is innovative. In this way, I think there is one very important point you mentioned in your contribution. The United Nations, even the declaration, makes 2 points explicit in 2 points, 2 articles, explicit reference to the economic model. Article 23, Article 25. And this is basically a capitalist model. I admire, I like the university and support this universal declaration. But I think we have to acknowledge it. It has its limits, and it is not about different morals or values that are Western-oriented, but it is about an economic model. It is about 50 years, roughly 60 years ago. it is time for a change there as well, and that means as well to rethink about political models, which are basically, again, something very much based in economic terms, not only a new Marx, the old Marx gave already a couple of answers to that. Thank you.